Before everything fell apart, my life followed a comfortable routine. I never imagined my world would turn upside down. Work was steady, relationships were stable, and I believed that hard work, honesty, and diligence would naturally make things fall into place. But I soon realized how little control I actually had over the important things. Looking back, I wonder if there were signs I missed. In hindsight, I can spot the small inconsistencies, the moments of unease I ignored because I trusted those around me. At the time, I brushed them off, focused on keeping the peace. My loyalty was my blind spot. When my therapist suggested I write down my experiences, she said my unresolved anger was a heavy burden. She believed that, until I confronted the pain of betrayal, I wouldn't be able to heal. Even now, I struggle to find closure, seeking answers that seem unreachable. My life is stuck, unable to move forward. She encourages me to view things differently, hoping I'll rediscover who I am beneath the hurt. Whoever he is, I don't know him, she says. That's my problem. My name is Robert Benson, 34 years old. I was a middle manager at an engineering firm designing machines. It was a family-owned business, so I knew I wouldn't move up since I wasn't family. The events I'm about to share led to my leaving the firm. I've been told I'm one of the good guys, hard-working with a sense of humor. I took my responsibilities seriously, especially my marriage, but it seemed I was the only one. In high school, I did slightly above average through hard work. I wasn't a genius, but I passed my exams. I had close friends who supported me. I wasn't a ladies' man, but I treated women well and took no for an answer. I dropped out of high school and began working for the firm as an apprentice while studying engineering at community college. I always enjoyed building things, from Duplo to Lego to Meccano and now computer design machines. My friends joked about my love for gadgets. I even wore one, a camera badge, at a party, which turned out to be more useful than I anticipated. At the end of my freshman year, my friend Bill convinced me to go to a party where nursing students hung out. I wasn't expecting much, but went for the live music. Bill's friend introduced us to the girls, and I was surprised when one of them, Carol, started talking to me. We danced, laughed, and she asked to see me again. I agreed, not knowing it would later show how naive I was. We started dating, and I felt emotions I'd rarely experienced. Carol took my breath away, and I missed her when she wasn't around. My parents teased me about it, but they were happy to see how much joy she brought me. I worked harder to show Carol that I could be someone she'd respect and maybe even love. We often talked about the future. She wanted to become a registered nurse and worried that having kids would interfere with her career. I told her having children could actually help, giving her valuable experience. We discussed it endlessly, but she was firm in her decision. My parents, especially my mom, who adored Carol, advised me to follow my heart. Carol was close to her sister Carrie, and after her night shifts, she'd often spend several days at Carrie's house 2 hours away. She'd tell me I was too busy to miss her, but I always did. I eventually gave in to Carol's no-kids condition, and we married 3 years after meeting on June 16, 2009. Bill was my best man, and Stephanie, no longer with Bill, was Carol's maid of honor. Carol looked stunning in her ivory satin dress, smiling at me as she walked down the aisle. I couldn't stop grinning. After the wedding, Carol moved into my house, which I had bought from my grandparents and fixed up myself. However, we had a disagreement over finances. Carol wanted to keep her own bank account, so we opened a joint account for shared expenses like bills and vacations. I lost that argument too. The first few years were good, though not perfect. We attended Carol's nursing class reunions, and while I was sometimes away for work, I felt out of place at these gatherings. Carol danced with a few doctors, but I didn't mind. I became friends with some of the husbands, and we bonded over golf. Occasionally, I went on golf trips that overlapped with Carol's reunions or her visits to her sister, which bothered me. Carol didn't talk much about her career, saying she was content as a regular nurse and didn't want the extra responsibility of a promotion. We planned most of our social life around her friends, but I still spent time with Bill and others for drinks. Carol sometimes joined us, and we enjoyed dancing, eating out, and weekend trips to Glasgow or Edinburgh. We also took vacations to beautiful beach destinations, though Carol preferred conservative swimsuits. We rarely argued. When we disagreed, we'd talk it through, and sometimes I'd win, sometimes she would. It never affected our relationship. In private, Carol could be adventurous and bold, and we tried new things together. Every day, I found myself loving her more. As our 10th anniversary approached, I wanted to plan something special. I talked to Stephanie about booking a hotel, dinner, and dancing. She agreed and promised to keep it a secret from Carol. A few days before the event, I told Carol, and she was thrilled. The next thing I knew, we were on our way with friends. At the hotel, Carol and Stephanie were deep in conversation, while Brian and I talked golf. Later, at the hotel nightclub, Carol spent most of the night dancing with me. But at one point, while we were dancing, a man tapped my shoulder, and when I turned around, Carol was in his arms. I was stunned. She looked at him with a happiness I'd never seen before. I walked back to the table, shocked, and Stephanie, clearly pleased, said, "Robert, it's great you let Carol dance with her first love. He was supposed to claim her at your wedding, but he didn't show." I was furious and demanded to know what was going on. No one would look at me except Stephanie, who smiled with contempt. I yelled at her for setting this up and ruining my evening. Carol heard me and pulled me into the hotel lobby. What she said next shattered me. "Robert, the man I danced with is Bruce Benning, my first and only love," she confessed. She explained they dated before we met, and though he was becoming a neurosurgeon, they stayed in touch. She loved him, not me, and said that's why she didn't want children with me. She knew she would eventually leave me for Bruce. Now she was leaving to be with him. She said she had loved being with me, but if Bruce hadn't returned, she would have stayed with me forever. My world crumbled. I felt sick, and before I knew it, I threw up. As I saw Bruce walking toward us, I snapped. I screamed at Carol, calling her names, and demanded she give me her wedding and engagement rings. The others were shocked by my anger. When Bruce approached, I warned him to stay away or he'd never use his hands again. I turned on everyone, accusing them of enjoying watching my humiliation. Then I looked at Carol again, filled with rage. I demanded the rings again, and she, seeing how dangerous the situation had become, handed them over. I stormed off to our room, grabbed my things, threw her clothes in the trash, and urinated on them. Before leaving, I gave my keycard to the receptionist, telling her Carol would pay the bill. Looking back, I regret not apologizing for throwing up in the lobby, but I doubt I'll ever return. I drove home in a daze, not remembering the trip. Once there, I calmed down and felt the need to act. I disabled the garage door opener, grabbed trash bags, and headed to the bedroom. I emptied Carol's closets and drawers into the bags, finding 2 keys, one for the vault, the other for a safety deposit box. I also went through her jewelry and papers, but found nothing suspicious at that moment. It was past 2 a.m., but I couldn't calm down. I searched online and found the storage facility she used. I went there wearing gloves to avoid leaving prints. What I found inside ripped me apart. I photographed everything and picked the locks on 2 cabinets. One contained Carol's secret plans, which shocked me, and the other was full of files on Bruce Benning, confirming my suspicions about him being a selfish, heartless narcissist. I returned home, bought new locks, and changed them before heading to the bank. In the safety deposit box, I found bonds in Carol's name. I photographed them, wondering where she got the money. Soon after, Carol texted asking to pick up her car. I replied, reminding her the car was in my name and I'd use it until the lease expired. I warned her not to bring Benning, and I threatened to burn her clothes if she didn't want them. Her sister called, shouting insults, so I blocked her. Though I hadn't planned on it, I ended up burning Carol's wedding dress in the fireplace, watching it turn to ashes like our marriage. An hour later, Carol arrived with Stephanie and Brian. Brian quietly asked how I was. I laughed bitterly and said, "What do you think? I'm furious with all of you for covering for her and with myself for being fooled by her." Carol looked irritated when I called her a promiscuous, as if she expected me to act normal. "Robert, I know you're hurting, but this isn't like you. You ruined the clothes I was going to wear for Bruce. I'll get my things and leave you alone. I've always loved Bruce, and you deserve someone who will love you and give you children. I really enjoyed our time together. If I hadn't met Bruce, I would have been happy with you. Can I have my wedding ring back as a reminder of the good times?" I yelled, "No! That ring has been in my family for generations. My mom cherished it, and you were supposed to be the one. I haven't even told them what a deceitful promiscuous you are." Carol flinched at my anger. As she loaded her bags with Brian and Stephanie's help, she asked about the wedding dress. "Check the fire pit," I said. When she saw the ashes, she cried, and Stephanie called me a prick. I snapped back, "She can't wear it for that a-hole now. Those are the ashes of my marriage. Who the hell do you think you are?" Brian stayed silent, clearly uncomfortable. Carol asked if she could check for anything I missed, and I agreed. While she did, I told Brian, "We won't be defending any more titles." He nodded. Carol came back down, speaking softly. "I'm sorry, Robert, but I've always loved Bruce. You'll find someone who truly loves you and will give you the family you want. This is for the best, even though it hurts." They left, and I went to bed exhausted. Later, my mom called, accusing me of striking Carol. Apparently, Carol had shown her pictures of supposed injuries. "Mom, she's lying. She's been having an affair with Bruce for years, and now she's trying to take everything. I've never raised a hand to her or any woman. You can believe her or me. But if you side with her, you'll lose me forever." I hung up. The battle had begun. After dinner, I returned home, ready to organize all the information I had. Following the money trail, I checked our joint account, and what I found was revealing. Carol's password book proved invaluable. I spent the rest of the evening and Sunday sorting through everything and changing all my passwords. "I've been played," I muttered, pacing. Every time she visited her sister, I was away, either competing or on vacation with my so-called friends. The realization hit me hard. She had been cheating the whole time. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early to check my leave balance. Sandra from HR noticed something was wrong. "Robert, are you okay?" she asked, concerned. "My world exploded. Friday was our anniversary, but she set it up for her lover to take her away right in front of me," I explained. "She's been seeing him for 13 years, accusing me of misuse now to destroy me." Sandra hugged me, saying, "I know you'd never hurt anyone. Call me if you need anything. There are people who know the truth." As I returned to my desk, my boss called me in. "Carol came to my house with pictures of you abusing her," he said accusingly. I replied, "Do you really believe that lying strumpet over me? Fire me or I'll leave now. I'm due 9 weeks of leave." He was stunned, but I didn't care. I resigned on the spot, sending my letter through internal mail. Later, I found more evidence from financial records showing Carol had been staying at a hotel 3 hours away, claiming she was visiting her sister. I packed up and drove there, enjoying the car even more knowing it annoyed Carol. At the hotel, I asked to speak to the manager. I knew it was a long shot to get information, but I explained that the man she was with was likely involved with another woman as well. Though they couldn't help without a court order, I wasn't surprised. After the manager left, the receptionist leaned in and spoke quietly. "I know the couple you're talking about. They've been here many times. He's a real arrogant idiot. I'm an old friend of the woman he's been stalking. He forced her to sell everything to get his money. I can put you in touch with her lawyer. She's great and can help you get a court order." I nodded, grateful. "Thanks." If Carol had just left with a prenup, I wouldn't have done anything. But now they're trying to ruin my life. They picked the wrong person. 15 minutes later, I met with Heather Morrison, a tough lawyer who listened as I explained everything. She asked, "Do you have the evidence?" I replied, "Yes, it's all documented on my phone and camera, and more organized on my laptop." Heather smiled. "Meet me tomorrow at 7:30, and we'll go over it all before heading to the courthouse at 8:30. I think we can get a warrant for the hotel videotapes." Feeling hopeful, I added, "He usually uses this hotel group. He scammed 3 other women." Heather's eyes hardened. "I'll be your lawyer if you want. That prick won't know what hit him." The next morning, I met Heather again, along with Jim, the father of one of Benning's sufferers, and a private investigator. I handed them an SD card with all the evidence, including files on another sufferer, Betsy. Jim, visibly angry, said, "The world would be better off without him." At the courthouse, Heather spoke with a clerk, which seemed unusual, but then a man approached and ordered the clerk to stop Betsy from paying or selling her house. He handed Heather a warrant for all the hotels in the group and warned the manager, Marvin, to cooperate or face jail. When we arrived at the hotel, Marvin hesitated, but Heather scared him into compliance. Security input the dates Carol claimed to visit her sister, and the names Mr. and Mrs. Benning appeared. Soon we had video evidence of Carol and Benning together, having a meal and entering their room. We also found 26 more reservations across different hotels in the group, though footage older than 18 months was unavailable. Heather was pleased, noting everything down, and the manager promised to send all the videos and documentation. Back in Heather's office, she laid out the plan. "We need them to initiate the divorce. If you file for infidelity now, they'll retaliate with charges using those pictures against you. Let them file first, and we'll dismantle their case with the evidence we have." Jim was still tracking down other sufferers while Heather prepared to use the videos to undermine Carol's case. Her team would handle the finances and legal details. "I need a break," I sighed. "I'm tired. I want to fight, but I'm exhausted." Heather agreed. "Take a few weeks off. You deserve it. But when you're ready, you'll need to find a job. Someone will hire you, even with these false accusations." Discovering that Benning had cheated on other women too oddly comforted me. I wasn't the only fool. Finding proof helped me feel less worthless, though I was still tired and angry whenever I thought about that night. I took some time off, heading south to ride roller coasters for stress relief, then up to Inverness to explore the North Coast 500. The scenery helped me forget the betrayal for a while. When I returned home, I was surprised to see my lawn well maintained. My neighbor Gordon came out smiling. "The Wanderer returns," he joked. "Sandra called, worried about you. She and some others helped tidy your garden. But officials have been looking for you, so expect a visit soon." I thanked him and promised to drop by for a beer after shopping. Over the next few weeks, Sandra and I talked regularly, but she never brought up Carol's lies. She just listened when I needed to vent, for which I was grateful. One evening, while Gordon and I were chatting, a court messenger arrived with divorce papers. He smirked as he handed them over. I smiled back, saying, "I hope the sheriff hates liars as much as I do." I immediately called Heather and sent her the documents. She reassured me, "Don't worry, Robert, we've got this." 7 weeks later, I was waiting in court with Heather for the divorce hearing. Jim was there too, looking happy and hugging me as I arrived. I sat next to Heather and Jim, with Sandra, Josie, Michaela, Gordon, Bill, and a few other supportive friends behind me. My brother Dan had offered support but couldn't come due to work in a falling out with our parents, who believed Carol over me. Carol's co-workers, Stephanie and Amy, sat behind her, and Benning stood next to her, grinning. His confidence wavered when Heather and Jim arrived. My parents were there, supporting Carol. I ignored their stares and Carol's glances. Bill quietly called her a powerfully dressed promiscuous, which I imagined earned some looks from Carol and Stephanie. Carol's attorney, Miss Johnston, began confidently, stating that Carol admitted to infidelity, but only after enduring misuse during the marriage. She asked for 10% of the joint assets and a divorce based on spousal misuse, aiming to have the judgment in Carol's favor. Heather could barely contain her laughter. Heather stood and addressed the court, explaining that there had been no mediation due to Carol's actions and agreeing to let Miss Johnston present her case first, as long as she could cross-examine witnesses. The sheriff agreed. Heather then outlined our case, emphasizing that Carol's lies were deliberate and intended to destroy my reputation, career, and relationships. She explained that Carol had caused me to lose my job and strain my friendships and family ties. Heather firmly stated there was no spousal misuse and they would prove it. When Carol took the stand, I kept my eyes forward. Carol's lawyer asked her about our relationship, and she claimed I became violent because I didn't like her working nights, accusing her of cheating with doctors. She tearfully described how I allegedly punched her and how she used makeup to hide the bruises, seeking refuge at her sister's house. She said her sister took pictures for the divorce. When asked if she was having an affair, Carol admitted it, explaining how she reconnected with Bruce, who was kind and supportive, helping her feel whole while she was being bullied by me. The lawyer guided Carol through every detail of her affair with Benning, right up to the anniversary dinner. She claimed I had threatened to rip off her finger for the ring and to break Benning's hands. Carol insisted my anger and cruelty scared her. She said she only wanted the engagement ring back and described her devastation upon finding her clothes trashed and her wedding dress burned. Her lawyer looked smug as she recounted it all. Next, her sister Carrie, Stephanie, and Benning testified, painting me as abusive. Carrie confirmed she had taken photos of Carol's bruises, which made Heather quietly smile. By the time Benning finished, it was late, and the judge called a recess. As I left the courtroom, Sandra loudly declared, "I've never heard such disgusting lies," and hugged me, along with my other supporters. My parents, siding with Carol, glared at me. The next morning, Heather cross-examined Carol, calling her by her maiden name, Reese. She asked Carol about meeting Benning and whether her affair story was true. Carol blushed and said yes. Heather then played a recording from our anniversary dinner where Carol had told me, "You've been the best husband anyone could wish for." Heather asked, "Are those the words of a misused wife?" Carol awkwardly claimed she was trying to show she cared, but hated me for my bullying. Heather pressed on, pointing out that Carol had acted like a loving wife during our anniversary, while secretly plotting with Benning. She played another recording where Carol admitted, "Robert, the man I danced with is Bruce Benning. He is my first and only love." The courtroom gasped as Carol revealed that she had always loved Bruce, even while married to me. She admitted he was the reason she didn't want children, as she planned to leave with him. Heather then presented surveillance footage of Carol outside our home and evidence of her hotel stays with Benning, challenging Carol's claims that she had been at her sister's house on certain dates. The video and reservation records proved she had been with Benning at hotels instead. Finally, Heather confronted Carol with the lack of any visible bruises in all the footage. She hammered home that Carol's claims of misuse were lies, exposing her affair as a willing, long-term deception with Benning, not the result of any mistreatment. Carol's face turned pale as Heather delivered the final blow. "You weren't saved by Benning. You were his willing partner." Carol shot a furious glare at Heather as muffled laughter spread through the gallery. Unfazed, Heather grew more intimidating. "Let's review that financial story you brought to court. According to your agreement with Mr. Benson, both of you were supposed to contribute part of your salary to a joint account. But that's not the full truth, is it? You wanted to hide your income from Mr. Benson, preparing for the day you might leave him. You lied for years, playing the devoted wife while secretly planning your exit." Heather hit another button, revealing Carol's bank statements on the screen. They displayed substantial savings she had concealed and significant payments from her job that she had kept secret. "A poor nurse who didn't want a promotion?" Heather scoffed. "But in reality, you're the third most senior nurse at the hospital, earning almost 4 times what you told Mr. Benson." Next, Heather brought up the bonds. "How do you explain these being in your name, found in your safety deposit box? These bonds belong to Mr. Benson, and you've been hoarding them." Visibly shaken, Carol tried to defend herself. "I was protecting myself after his misuse," she muttered. Heather wasn't buying it. "These are verified facts, Miss Reese, and they prove you've been lying. You want your wedding ring back? An adulteress wouldn't expect to keep it, would she? Is it sentimental? A reminder of the good man you threw away?" In a rare moment of defiance, Carol replied, "I love that ring. It meant everything to me, especially after he burned my wedding dress. I want it back." Heather pressed another button, showing a picture of Bruce Benning and Carol at a hospital event 9 months before her marriage ended. The image captured Carol proudly displaying a new engagement ring. Heather's tone turned icy. The newspaper beautifully described the event. Mr. Benning proudly showed off the unique engagement ring he gave his fiancée. It's strikingly similar to the one Mr. Benson mistakenly gave to a woman claiming to be his fiancée, isn't it? It was all a performance, wasn't it, to make Benning seem committed, securing a doctor's wife for his career? Carol sat there, speechless, as Heather continued. "Benning will keep you around as long as it benefits his professional ambitions. When he's done with you, he'll discard you, just like he planned. Still upset over your wedding dress? Did you plan to wear it if... No, when Benning marries you?" Carol's response was barely a whisper. "No," she said, but the tears followed. The gallery murmured, and it was clear to all that Carol's lies were unraveling. Heather wasn't done. She turned to Stephanie, who had stood by Carol's side throughout. "Stephanie," she began calmly, "how long have you known about Carol's affair?" Stephanie turned pale. "The affair was with Robert," she stammered. "Carol has always been with Bruce." Heather's smile was cutting. "Why lie for her?" "I didn't lie," Stephanie shakily replied. "I just repeated what I was told." Heather's questioning tore through Stephanie's defenses until there was nothing left to hide. Carol's entire web of deceit was collapsing, the truth exposed for all to see. Heather asked, "Have you ever seen the bruises Carol claimed she had?" Stephanie hesitated. "No," she admitted. "She was just so upset, and I believed her." Despite numerous questions, Stephanie refused to admit she had been a fool, standing by her friend. Heather was relentless. Stephanie had no way out. Finally, Heather asked, "Do you know how to tell the truth? How many boyfriends do you have? Do you plan to pull the same stunt with your husband when something better comes along?" Stephanie was stunned. "I love my husband. I wouldn't do that." Heather pressed another button, displaying a video of Stephanie and her husband, Amy Grant, leaving the room and meeting Carol and Bruce. Stephanie collapsed on the counter before fainting. Amy yelled from the gallery, "You damn liar!" and stormed out. It seemed Brian and Grant were about to find out what had happened. Heather turned to the sheriff. "May I call another witness before cross-examining Bruce Benning? Their testimony will clarify things for the court." The sheriff agreed. As I later learned from Bill, Benning appeared to have had a heart attack. When Heather called Samantha Wiseman, a woman I'd never seen stepped up to the podium. She looked flawless, like she walked straight out of a cosmetics ad. Heather smiled. "Miss Wiseman, what's your profession?" Samantha answered cautiously. "I'm a creative, working in theater, film, and TV. I create textural effects or use makeup to enhance events." Think of street artists who create illusions like giant holes in the road or trains bursting through walls. I can make people look like that. Heather continued. Do you know Bruce Benning? Samantha responded carefully. Yes, I met him in Bristol. My son Alan had a benign brain tumor, and Mr. Benning performed the surgery. It was a success. That was 8 years ago. Heather asked, how did Mr. Benning learn about your skills? Samantha explained, after the surgery, Alan's motor skills were impaired. I helped him regain control of his arm and hand by sculpting monsters with plasticine. Mr. Benning walked in and was fascinated by what I was doing. Heather pressed on. Did things go beyond that? Samantha replied, yes, it was around Halloween and he asked me to do his makeup for a party. He wanted to look like an abusive spouse because his friends always said he was too serious and never got a joke. He said his reputation was unfair. He claimed he wouldn't stand for a woman telling him no or showing superiority over him. It would prove to everyone they were wrong. I did his makeup for 3 parties that year, and each time the bruises were a different shade. I've done it 3 more times since then, spaced a few years apart. Heather asked, besides Mr. Benning, do you know anyone else in this courtroom? Samantha glanced around and replied, Carol and Samantha. I did their makeup for some parties in Liverpool last year. They said their husbands would never touch them, but they were curious to see how their friends would react. Heather pressed a button, and images of Carol and Samantha appeared on the screen. They must have been Samantha's work, showing the entire process. Neither woman had a mark before she started. By the time she finished, it was believable enough that I thought I had strike Carol. She's incredibly talented. I almost laughed when I realized the photos Carol showed in court were the same ones. Heather stammered, so all those photos are of your work, and none of the bruises are real? Samantha answered, when they arrived, they were spotless. When they left, they looked knockin'. Heather asked, did you know what your work would be used for? Samantha was shocked. No, I'd never be part of that. If I had known, I would have told the truth. Heather simply replied, thank you. Miss Johnston had no questions. She looked shocked and defeated. The sheriff hummed, as if signaling his satisfaction with the case being near its end. But Heather wasn't finished. As Benning was testifying, 2 men entered the courtroom looking only at him. Benning's expression darkened. I kept my gaze fixed on him, eager to watch Heather break him down. My smile, rehearsed for this moment, betrayed how much I looked forward to it. Heather began, Mr. Benning, you had an affair with Miss Reese before she married Mr. Benson, didn't you? Benning replied arrogantly, no, I only stepped in to help her. Heather dismantled his lies bit by bit. His arrogance made me shudder. He only loved himself, constantly flaunting his achievements. When Heather finally cornered him, the metaphorical trapdoor opened. Heather grinned. Yesterday, you claimed you became physical engaged with Miss Reese only after her husband attacked her. But today, I've shown the court years of evidence of your secret meetings in hotels, some lasting for days. She laughed at your attempts to seduce her. Benning, furious, retorted, no, we only became physical engaged recently. Heather continued, hotel staff often complained about the noise coming from your room. Those moose screams during your physical engaged moments. Are the hotel staff lying? Benning stared at her as she listed the many complaints. Heather smiled and added, there's more about your behavior. Heather started to conclude, you've lied to cover up your affair with a married woman. You've lied to your employers, claiming all of this is a fabrication. Are you truly a surgeon, or is that another lie? Benning, growing angrier, shouted, I am a surgeon, one of the best. Heather laughed. You may be skilled with a scalpel, but as a human being, you're deplorable. She pressed a button, displaying pictures of Benning's past abusive relationships. The accompanying letters showed how he had manipulated 4 different courts into granting him financial settlements from women like Betsy, whom he had pretended to befriend. Heather scrolled through more damning images and letters. The courtroom watched as Benning's pattern of manipulation and deceit became evident. She pressed further. These records suggest that you orchestrated these schemes as revenge against women who rejected you. Isn't that true? Benning sat silently, visibly uncomfortable. Heather continued. Court documents show that all these women denied attacking you. Yet you convinced the sheriff with fabricated evidence. You lied, didn't you? Benning fidgeted, but said nothing. Heather leaned in, sensing her advantage. Your colleagues were right about you. You can't handle women standing up to you. You pursued them for their property and persecuted them when they said no. You lied in court, didn't you?" Benning's face turned red, but he remained tight-lipped. Heather's voice sharpened. "You're nothing but a small man, in every sense, Mr. Benning." His outburst didn't escape the sheriff's notice, and Heather almost laughed when he snapped, calling her a bloody witch. Unfazed, Heather pressed on. "You've lied your way through this entire case, and now the truth is out. Your arrogance is crumbling, and you know what's coming next." She gestured to the two men in the courtroom. "Do you know who they are?" Benning's eyes widened as he glanced at them. Heather smirked. "They're here to arrest you." She wasn't finished. "You didn't just lie about your relationships, you plotted to destroy people's lives. Let's talk about Carol now." She displayed records of Benning's meetings with Carol, their correspondence, and their plans. "You denied communicating with her during this time, didn't you?" Benning stammered. "We weren't," Heather cut him off. "But here's a detailed plan where you conspired to accuse Mr. Benson of attacking Carol. You created this to ruin an innocent man's life." At this, sobs echoed through the gallery. Carol's lies were fully exposed, and the tension in the room was thick with emotion. Heather pressed on, relentless. "You were planning to destroy him, weren't you? His career, his marriage, everything. And you thought there'd be no consequences?" Benning, clearly shaken, tried to downplay it. "It was just talk. We weren't really going to go through with it." Heather, incredulous, fired back. "But you did. You set it all in motion. You manipulated Miss Johnston into bringing this case to court, thinking you'd walk away untouched." She paused for effect before continuing. "And you weren't stopping there, were you? You were already plotting your next scheme to steal more money, weren't you?" Benning denied it, but his unease grew. He glanced nervously at the two men and at Carol, who was visibly distraught. Heather, sensing the final blow was near, addressed the gallery. "Now, let's turn to the final piece of evidence." She pressed a few buttons, and the courtroom collectively gasped as a new document appeared on the screen. It was Benning's plan to sue Carol for all her money. A loud sob burst from Carol as she saw her name in the details of Benning's betrayal. Her crying intensified as the plan to marry her, only to discard her later, was revealed. Benning had been planning to use her as a pawn to secure his position as chief neurosurgeon, only to ruin her life once he got what he wanted. Heather addressed the court. "This so-called surgeon has lied in court after court, manipulating others to secure financial gains. And now Sheriff Griffiths in Hamilton has issued a warrant for his arrest." She motioned toward the two officers. "These officers are here to execute that warrant on behalf of his sufferers." As the officers approached, Benning paled, his defeat obvious. Heather added, "This morning, I secured a court order freezing all of your assets. It's already in effect." She stared directly at him. "I'm sure Miss Reese now understands the difference between what she threw away and the con artist standing before us." The officers handcuffed Benning, leading him out of the courtroom. The gallery sat in stunned silence as Heather turned to the sheriff, signaling her work was complete. Heather then turned to me. "Mr. Benson, I believe it's time for your testimony." I stood up and took the stand, still reeling from all the revelations. Heather gently guided me through the details of my marriage, the betrayal, and the lies that had upended my life. I explained the shock I felt upon learning what had been happening behind my back, how my world collapsed because of their lies. "I lost my job, my parents distanced themselves, and many of my friends cut me off," I explained, my voice heavy with emotion. "They all believed I was a misuser. I haven't been able to find work since, despite being a damn good engineer." Heather nodded, giving me space to share my story. "And how has this impacted your life?" "It's taken everything from me," I said quietly. "Everything I cared about." The sheriff, visibly moved, gave his closing remarks. "Mr. Benson, you have been fully vindicated and spared a gross mishap of justice. You are, as your attorney said from the beginning, a decent, honest, and caring person. You deserve a good future with someone who shares those qualities." With that, the case was closed, and the courtroom erupted in tears and embraces. Jim hugged Heather, then me. Bill, Sandra, and others came over to offer their support. I saw my mother in the gallery, crying. She had lost her daughter because of these lies, and her time with her grandchildren had been cut short. But at least now, the truth was out. The next day, the sheriff dissolved my marriage and awarded me my rightful share of our joint assets. He ordered my ex-wife to repay the money she had used on her affair and car, as well as contribute to our joint account. The settlement amounted to £112,500, and she was ordered to pay me £675 a month until I found a job with a salary comparable to what I had lost. Heather's team had every detail meticulously documented, and the court received the evidence. Carol looked like a shell of her former self, and even Samantha's makeup couldn't hide the toll her tears had taken. The sheriff sternly warned Carol that he was considering jail time for her courtroom lies. "If the truth hadn't come out, you would be facing a much longer sentence," he said. Carol was fined £5,000, and her 3-month suspended sentence would become active if she failed to pay within a month. Carrie and Samantha were each fined £1,000, also due within 30 days. Heather's next steps were clear. She would pursue Benning's removal from the medical register through the General Medical Council. While we spoke, Jim got a call from Hamilton Court. Benning had been taken into custody. Sheriff Griffiths made it clear to Benning's defense that the next time he appeared in court, he would need to deposit all the money he had stolen from those 4 women into the court account, or face a long prison sentence. Additionally, he would be responsible for covering all court fees and any other justified expenses incurred due to his false claims. Even with those payments, he was still looking at prison time. Heather also planned to appeal to the nursing board about Carol's behavior, though she knew it would likely fail since Carol hadn't misused her position like Benning. Still, it would raise a red flag for potential employers. As I moved forward, Heather advised me to endure the child support payments until I found a new job. Jim startled me when he quietly said, "Stay with Sandra for a bit. She seems to like you. Whenever I talk to her, she's always kind and thoughtful. Maybe you two can help each other out, even though she said she can't be what you want, whatever that means. I'll say this once. With everything you've been through, you should see a counselor. Despite your cheerful attitude, you're hurting a lot. You're not fooling us. A counselor can help you find yourself, live your life, and find happiness. You deserve that. Heather and I have seen so much over the years, but your story is one for books and movies. You're a good, decent, honorable man. Help me get that man back and make a damn good life that'll prove them wrong." As we parted, Heather's final words made me chuckle. "If you think the sheriff let her off easy by not throwing her in jail, he didn't. My bill will be around £24,000. Yours would be lower since you were so helpful to Betsy, but she'll never know it." Dan came by after work, looking happy for me but exhausted from sleepless nights with the new baby. They'd decided to have a 3rd child because he wanted a son, and now he had one. Our parents hadn't met him yet. He offered me a night shift job, but I declined. I didn't have much experience in that field. He put his arm around me and said, "You'll find the right person. You'll have the family you want, at least until you get hit with that first dirty diaper." He laughed as he left. Later, Sandra, Josie, Michaela, Gordon, Bill, and a few others came over to celebrate with drinks. It felt great to have some fun. Josie surprised me by asking me to dance. She smiled, pulling me closer. "Take a chance with Sandra. She's always had feelings for you. You two would be a good match, and if not, Michaela or I will scoop you up." She laughed, pretending I'd stepped on her foot as she waddled away. Sandra was the last to leave. "Robert," she said, "I told you before that if you ever needed anything, I'd be there for you. I still mean that. I wish I could be the woman you need. If I had been, maybe Michaela, Josie, and the others would have been great friends. Or more. You're too good a man to be alone. I've seen how you are with other people's kids. You'll make a great dad. Do what you need to find that love. Maybe we can help each other. I was too young and didn't know myself well enough to help you back then. You meant a lot to me. You were my first love, not just a crush. Jim suggested I see a counselor to find myself. Maybe we should both go and see what happens. I have a void. I don't know who I am." Sandra smiled. "Robert, if we do this, it's only because I want to be with you as a partner, and maybe someday as a mother, you deserve that." She sighed. "Let's try seeing a counselor." 2 days later, the local newspaper came out, and I was on the front page. The article was detailed, explaining how they had tried to set me up. No one was left doubting that I was the good guy. The comments section online showed no support for her, and some of the things people said about her fate were unsettling. About 8 weeks later, Heather emailed me with copies of her letters to the General Medical Council, the General Board of Nursing, and the leadership of Cary Evangelical Church. She didn't spare Benning, detailing his public disclosures, lies in court, and demanding his medical registration be suspended immediately. At his 3rd hearing, despite repaying over £250,000 he had swindled from those women, Sheriff Griffiths sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Heather handed Samantha Wiseman's photographs and testimony to the prosecutor, who made sure Benning's defense had the evidence before they even left the courtroom. Benning pleaded guilty on the first day of his plea hearing, earning a 33% reduction on his sentence. Sheriff Griffiths cited an earlier ruling upheld by the Court of Appeal, saying that while the maximum term was 5 years, he believed the High Court would have given Bennings 7.5. He considered sending him to the High Court, but decided against it due to the backlog caused by COVID. "Appeal at your own risk," he said. Bennings' disgrace made national headlines, and Sunday papers tore him apart. I was approached for comment but declined, stating I was still too emotionally raw from her betrayal to speak publicly. Heather's letter to the evangelical church leadership raised questions about Carrie's suitability for her role and potential promotions. She pointed out that Carrie had lied under oath, violating the very commandment she swore on the Bible to uphold. I doubted her marriage would survive, given how zealous her husband was about their faith. At the golf club, I found out Brian and Stephanie had split, and Amy and Grant had broken up too. Even Sarah and Mark were having issues because of her closeness to the others, leading to Mark's growing suspicions. At least my golf shots went 15 yards farther when I imagined the ball belonged to one of the Bennings. As for Carol, I couldn't care less about her. Karma's a witch. Sandra and I have been seeing 2 psychologists for over 3 months now. It's been tough, but we've been there for each other. Well, at least she's been there for me. Sharon helps Sandra, and I go along, but only stay for the big stuff. Sandra told me her mom was pretty terrible to her. Really bad, actually. I had dated Sarah, and Sandra would hug me when I cried. When we talked about my feelings regarding Carol and our marriage, I was a mess. Sarah helped me break down the emotional wall I had built to cope. I hated her for easing the pain because she made me confront the real issue. Carol's betrayal wasn't the worst part. It was how far she was willing to go to destroy me that broke me. I didn't recognize this version of Carol, and I didn't recognize myself anymore. Sarah told me I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just turning my anger inward because I couldn't find answers. She said if I could write it all down and see it clearly like an engineering problem, I'd realize it was 2 deceitful people who did this to me. It wasn't my fault. I didn't play any part in what they did. I was the good guy everyone saw. Sandra backed Sharon up on this, and because of her, I wrote this article. She was very convincing, even offering me a reward if I did it. I've read the article several times, and I can finally see that none of this was my fault. None of us had any reason to suspect what Carol was doing. We had a perfect marriage, hardly any arguments. Maybe I was gullible for believing she loved me, but there was nothing I could have done to stop what they planned. Now, I just need to come to terms with that. I know I ruined their plans more than they ruined mine. I called Sandra to tell her I was finished with the article. She said she'd be over soon. I'm not sure what the reward will be, but she's an amazing baker, and she teased me with the idea of scones. I love scones. We've been spending a lot of time together, cuddling at the movies or at her house, fitting in time whenever we can. We have great conversations. We share so many interests, though some don't really interest each other, and that's fine with us. For instance, she doesn't get why I like golf. A good walk ruined, she calls it. A few weeks ago, Sandra talked to Sharon about her love for kids and her hope of having some close by. Sharon's helping her with that, as our last session showed. So maybe she sees a future there. There was a knock at the door, and it was Sandra. She looked nervous, so I took her coat. She gave me the strangest look, her lips tight like she does when she's stressed, and she looked terrified. She sighed, shrugged, and slowly took off her coat. I've been doing what Sharon suggested to prepare, but I'm scared, she said. I led her into the living room and sat down beside her. Sandra, you don't have to do this. Robert, I want to. This is the first step toward being more for you. What else could I do? We moved forward. 2 weeks later, everything changed again. I was in a great mood because I got a job with a competitor of Ducharme, paying me more than they did. Neil Davidson seemed like a solid guy. During the interview, everything I'd heard about him was confirmed. He'd been through his own struggles, so he understood what I was going through, but that didn't stop him from thoroughly testing my engineering skills. Sandra and I spent most evenings together. Last weekend, I took her to a roller coaster park in Staffordshire. It was her first time, and she screamed the whole ride, but loved it. I booked a room with twin beds, and when Sandra came in, she seemed deep in thought after her 2 sessions with Sharon that week. I picked her up and danced with her, thrilled about my new job and, more importantly, about having her in my life. I kept telling her how happy I was as we danced. That same day, I proposed to her. We toasted to the future. She said, "We'll have time to talk about what we want, but is there anything you think we should discuss now?" I glanced around. "Where are we going to live? You might not want to stay here because of its history." Sandra laughed. "I'll live anywhere with you. I don't see any reason to move." The new houses feel like rabbit holes. I used to come here with you when you visited your grandparents, and the love in this place made it special. We'll make our own memories here. There's plenty of space, 4 bedrooms and room for another bathroom. I'd change some of the colors, but that's about it. The garden's big enough for kids to play safely. We could even plant some vegetables, herbs, and maybe fruit. I nodded. What about the wedding? Are you planning the perfect one? Sandra seemed surprised. I've never dreamed of having a big wedding. It'll be small. I only have my mom, sister, and her family. I've got 4 or 5 close friends. 2 of them will pretend to be mad I stole you from them. You've got your friends like Bill and Gordon and your brother and his family. I understand you don't talk much about your parents and that you feel betrayed by them. I just worry that our kids won't have grandparents to spoil them. My dad died young, and my mom's not in the best health. But she was a great mom and will be a wonderful grandmother. It's your choice, and I'll support it either way, I said quietly.